Conor, these days you speak 10 languages. How do you manage to do that? Have you always been this good at languages, or how was it 10 years ago, for example?
No, actually, in fact, most people don't realize this, that when I was in high school, I completely sucked at languages.
Mhm.
In fact, my three worst grades at my final exams were English, French, and Irish, and it was only later on that I started to learn them.
Yeah.
I went on Erasmus, an exchange program, and when I was in university, to France. And when I arrived, I couldn't even order a sandwich on the train. I
Yeah.
actually had to point and grunt.
Uh-huh.
And I spent the first 2 months a complete mute. I was dependent on my friends who were with me to either interpret what was going on or to translate for me, because I couldn't communicate with
And
them.
how was that experience? I guess you didn't want that to happen again, right?
No, it was very frustrating,
Yeah.
right? To be constantly dependent on someone. And in fact, that's been one of my main motivations to learn languages, is to be more and more independent when I travel, right? Because what happens invariably is that if you don't speak the local language, then you're either going to be dependent on locals who can speak your language, or if it's English normally, or you're going to be dependent on someone who's traveling with you, like an interpreter, and that comes at a cost, and in terms of money, and also in terms of what you get out of the travel experience, I find.
So back to the train ride in France. So you went to France. You had bad experiences of not speaking the language. Was that the thing that gave you the motivation to start to become successful learning French? Or?
Yeah, when I spent a year in France, and I managed to overcome my initial lack of French knowledge, and I learned the language, and that motivated me to keep going, because at the end of the year in France, I actually went to Italy on a 2-week trip with some friends, and I really loved the country, and I loved the food, the language, the history, the monuments, the weather. It was fantastic.
That gave you the motivation to learn Italian after French, I guess.
Exactly. Actually, when I left Italy after the 2 weeks, I promised myself that I would come back and I would live in Italy for 1 year, and that I would learn the language. And I managed to do that a couple of years later.
So first you went to France, you learned the language there. Afterwards, I think it got easier to learn also Italian, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are cognate languages. There's a lot they have a lot in common. They're both originally from Latin. They have a Latin origin, so you have a lot of vocabulary and sentence structure, syntax that's quite similar. So that definitely helps when you have that kind of crutch with a similar language.
And afterwards, you did the same with many other languages by traveling to the countries. For example, you learned Portuguese in Brazil. Spanish, I think, was in the States, right?
That's right. That was interesting. I actually I went to grad school in Washington D.C. Where I studied international relations at Johns Hopkins. And there I lived in a Spanish-speaking neighborhood. Yeah. So every day when I came out, I would go to the shop, and I took some Spanish classes also at university. So I got to use it all the time during my.
What are the countries in which countries have you lived, by the way?
Well, I've lived and worked in the Netherlands, Germany, France, Belgium, the United States, Ireland. I think that's all.
You have also traveled a lot in Eastern Europe and in Russia. Yeah. Which of all these countries where you have lived and traveled do you like the most?
Well, I fell in love in Italy after I first went there, and that's still my favorite country in Europe.
Yeah.
I really like Brazil. I think Brazil is an absolutely fantastic place. Again, it's got like amazing culture, the diversity with the north being more African influenced, the south being very European influenced. The food, the people, the carnival, it's really fun.
What do you like so much about Russia? Because it's very different from Italy and Brazil, right?
Yeah, when I was at grad school in the United States, I took some classes on the new Eurasia, which is like the former Soviet Union. And I took a semester of Russian as well. And I was really fascinated by the history and the politics of the region. So when I returned to Europe after my studies, I really wanted to go and see it for myself. So I traveled extensively in countries like Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and into the Baltics.
Cool. You travel a lot, and you've traveled a lot in the past as well. How do you manage to combine traveling and your working life?
Well, I've always sought to utilize the time that I have, the free time that I have, to travel as much as possible to places that I'm interested in. So I've always used my weekends, my annual leave to really do my best to see the places that I'm really interested in, that maybe I've been to before, but also to explore new places. So especially in Europe, the continent's not very geographically large, and we have a lot of low-cost airlines, trains, the infrastructure is very good. So it's actually quite easy to go and to travel, and you can, you know, in a weekend probably, if you wanted to go through 4 or 5 different countries with 5 corresponding languages.
And speak the 5 languages.
Exactly.
There. So that's what you do nowadays to maintain your languages. Right?
Exactly.
You travel to all the countries, and well, you also have friends in almost every country, right?
Well, I don't know if I have them in every single one, but probably pretty close to it. Having studied and worked and traveled so extensively, I've started to look at Facebook search and go, okay, there's an option you can go, my friends living in whatever city, before I go there, and I'm reminded of who's there and who may have moved there in the meantime, and then I can kind of reconnect with them if I...
And I can imagine that that also gives you motivation to learn, well, to continue learning the language, or to improve your speaking ability in the language, because you know you have the friends there, and it's fun if you speak their language, right?
Exactly, it's a complete lifestyle. So when I wake up in the morning and I look at my phone, I probably have messages and emails from, I don't know, normally I have maybe 30 to 50 per day, and they're probably always in the different languages, and then I'll reply to them. So it definitely gives you further motivation, and it's a virtuous circle in the sense that it's positive. I mean, the more that I have friends who communicate with me in the different languages, obviously that helps me learn them, and also gives me further motivation. So it's really like, and then I want to go and see where they are.
And then you speak the language even better as you did before, and it becomes easier to speak the language, easier to travel the country, easier to make new friends. So that's what you mean by it.
Yeah, precisely. And then the next languages always become easier after that as well.
Also, in your personal life, have you had any relationships with, well, girls from other countries, or that had another native language?
Yeah, several, and it was really interesting. Some of my personal relationships I already spoke. My partner's their native tongue. Yeah. And in another relationships, I learned it during the relationship, and in others, I never learned their first language.
How was the difference? Do you think that it helps understanding your partner better if you speak her native language, or? Yeah,
of course. I mean, I definitely see a big difference between the relationships I had where I never learned the language and those where I either spoke it or I learned it during the relationship. I think even if your boyfriend or girlfriend, your husband or wife speaks your native tongue, in my case English, not speaking their language always makes it harder to understand their culture, definitely, and also it leaves a greater room for miscommunication, I think, overall. So definitely I see that it was the relationship I had where I could speak the language were definitely stronger.
So if you want to be more successful in your relationships you have, not only with your partner but also friends in other countries, then it helps for sure if you speak multiple languages, or at least the language of your that your friend or partner speaks.
Exactly, that's the way I see it.
Okay. How did knowing multiple languages help you in your professional life?
Well, definitely it's given me a lot of benefit, because several of the jobs that I've had, I would not have gotten if I didn't speak a specific language. I don't think it's necessarily the case that if you speak 5 languages and 10 languages, 20 languages, people are more likely to hire you for that per se. I think the more languages you speak, the more opportunities you have in terms of employment or business with each specific language, right? So this opens a new, it opens new doors of opportunity, I think, definitely, and it's definitely helped me in my professional life.